First of all, I'd like to thank Swamiji, Sadhviji, Paramarth Niketan, Culture Kumbh, the team of Shantanuji, Shefaliji, and Mr. Sharma for organizing this fantastic event. This has given us an opportunity to come and participate in the Kumbh. And when so many people are finding it difficult to actually gain access to this place with this kind of a crowd, despite the organization, but for Culture Kumbh, I don't think we'd have had this kind of a welcome. So thank you so much. So I wanted to talk about culture, constitution, nation, so on and so forth, but let me start it slightly differently. So last week I was watching a podcast on what is happening with the polar ice caps, the Arctic ice caps. So ever since Mr. Trump has become the president, we know that the Panama Canal is now the subject of dispute. There's a lot of conversation going around. How does the United States want to pull off or pull back from its arrangement there, or it may want to even take over the canal. And then people are discussing alternative routes, alternative trade routes and shipping routes. One of them is now to use the Arctic sea route, because the polar ice caps, the Arctic polar ice caps have started melting heavily. And over the last 10 years or 15 years, the pace of melting has increased so much that what was previously an unpassable route has become a passable route. And therefore, the next battle is going to be to see who gets to access that as quickly as possible. China, Russia, America have already jumped into the fray, coupled with the fight over Greenland, because it seems to have the largest possible deposits of two important commodities: black gold, namely petrol, oil, and of course, rare minerals which are used for electronics. And that made me wonder. I'll come back to the topic, trust me, I'll circle back to the topic. If we think of nature and environment only as a resource for more and more resources, and now even the polar ice caps are not being spared, what is the point of discussing climate change? Climate change is going to become only an ornamental topic, because the thing that should be alarming us is the pace at which the polar ice caps are melting. What is going to be the consequence of the melting of polar ice caps on environment in general? And when the polar ice caps melt, just like the Amazon forests, it has an impact on the climate of the entire world. It is not going to be a localized effect. So that got me thinking, when such an important development is underway, we do not have a single point of view which decides to put nature first. Because Western philosophy or Western worldview, while it manages to keep its cities clean, does so after having destroyed nature through heavy industrialization. And that's when I wanted to ask myself, perhaps the only philosophy, and I could be wrong here, perhaps the only philosophy or darshan which is capable of presenting a balanced point of view in defense of nature is the Bharatiya worldview. But unfortunately, we still don't have the strength or the standing to influence the dialogue or the discourse on these subjects. पर्यावरण और प्रकृति जैसे सब्जेक्ट्स में भी अगर आपको बोलना है और आपको हावी होना है so that your point of view becomes the dominant point of view, तब तक नहीं होगा जब तक आपके हाथ में शक्ति ना हो. Perhaps what I'm trying to say is that Bharat must not aspire to become a superpower for the sake of becoming a superpower, but because Bharat will have the ability to address issues which affect everyone on the globe in a manner that is consistent with peaceful coexistence with nature only when it has power. Therefore, Shakti is important. Perhaps the only civilization or surviving civilization that continues to speak of Loka Kalyan and not the Kalyan of a particular mazhab or a particular community is Sanatana Dharma. It was previously Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. It is now Samasta Loka Sukhino Bhavantu because we believe in more than one lok. This is the only philosophy that is capable of addressing all the key challenges facing the society at an individual level, right from issues of depression to issues that affect us collectively, namely climate change. But Bharat cannot hope to be a relevant stakeholder, forget even being a dominant stakeholder on these important topics, until Bharat regains its parichaya, its identity. And therefore, every internal challenge and external challenge that Bharat faces to its identity has consequences not just for Bharat, but also for the rest of the world. Bharat is not the light of the East, Bharat is the light of the world. This statement doesn't come from a source of jingoism or patriotism merely because I'm born here, but because each time the world has looked for guidance on key issues which are existential in nature, one way or another, it is Bharat which has actually provided the answers. The fact of the matter is, Europe came out of dark ages through Islamic invasions, but the knowledge that was transmitted to Europe was Bharatiya knowledge through the Islamic invaders into Europe. So I keep reading a lot of history, but I also read, let's say, philosophical takes on history. Why did Bharat go through that extremely painful, excruciating phase from 712 AD onwards or even before, and we are still going through it? I don't think we have fully come out of it. I hope we are in the process of coming out of it. What is the purpose of it? There is a New Zealand photographer who has become a fan of Bharat, who has come to Bharat often, who has visited ashrams across the world, and he wrote a fantastic book. His name is Howard Murphet, and if possible, please do Google him up. He was a World War II photographer who then came to Bharat and decided to make this place his home. He said, while the historical take could be that Bharat has suffered invasions, the philosophical take is, but for these invasions, perhaps the knowledge of Bharat may not have gone out fully. I'm not saying that the invasions were right, but if you look at it from a different perspective, the knowledge of Bharat has actually spread to the rest of the world subsequently, significantly. And it continues to do so, that even the best of minds from the most advanced of nations do not have answers to questions and challenges of consciousness. They have to come back to Bharat, because the one form of engineering that we have mastered and we have been masters of for generations and for millennia is inner engineering. We have understood that better than anybody else. It takes you back to another issue, that when you're discussing artificial intelligence, which fundamentally looks at replicating human consciousness in a different, let's say, non-transient or non-sentient being, so to speak, Bharat should have been at the forefront of the discussion on artificial intelligence and consciousness, but it is still not there yet. And without the tempering effect of Bharat, without the responsible worldview of Bharat, artificial intelligence is capable of wrecking the third or the fourth wave of havoc on human minds. The Industrial Revolution did not have a conscience to it. The space age did not have a conscience to it. The nuclear age did not have a conscience to it. Now the AI age will have no conscience unless Bharat steps up and takes its own responsibility. All the previous ages have been about mastering something that has been external to us, namely the resources outside, whether it is space or whatever it may be. But artificial intelligence can be perhaps the most devastating, let's say, revolution, so to speak, unless it is tempered by the limiting effect of dharma. If AI does not have a dharmic bent of mind, and by that I don't mean a Hindu bent of mind, I mean a righteous bent of mind with a certain understanding of rights and responsibilities, what it can do to our consciousness is incredible and, according to me, positively scary. Take, for example, a simple case study of the impact of Facebook, X, and TikTok on the young generation. And as parents, you know that you have lost your children, or at least their bandwidth and their mind spaces, to social media significantly. Because each of these platforms is designed to hook people through addiction. and the kind of dopamine kicks that social media is capable of delivering on a regular basis, I don't know of a single drug that is capable of doing it. Not that I've ingested any drug. And Bharat needs to step up right now, because that revolution, unlike other revolutions, is not going to visit us 10 or 15 years later. It will hit the shores of Bharat, or it has already hit the shores of Bharat when it has already entered the shores of West. Previously, at least when you're looking at computers, information age, so on and so forth, it would take about one generation for that revolution to land on the shores of Bharat. But when it comes to artificial intelligence, right now we are so interconnected with the rest of the globe that we cannot keep ourselves completely immune from the impact of artificial intelligence. The good part of Sanatana Dharma is that it is not just a religious outlook, it is an all-encompassing, wholesome outlook which looks at nature, which looks at individual, which looks at the society, which has a very clear let's say conception of rashtra and rajya, and it also has very clear takes on what should be our approach to technology. Technology without conscience is tyranny. And we are gradually moving in that particular direction. Now let's connect all these meta topics, these earth-shattering topics, to the topic that has been given to me. I have been asked to speak on the topic of Bharat, civilization to nation, roughly translating to the journey of Bharat from Sanskriti to Rashtra, because the translation for nation is not Rajya, it is Rashtra. So let me try and understand these words for my own sake, and let's see if I'm able to make sense to the audience. Sanskriti, Rashtra, and then Rajya. संस्कृति से निकलता है राष्ट्र, उस राष्ट्र की कल्पना से निकलता है राज्य. संस्कृति और राष्ट्रीयता के बगैर राज्य नहीं निकल सकता है. The political unit, which is the Rajya or the state, is the last mile of that particular journey, where it starts with civilization and then it moves gradually towards the conception of a nation as to who we are as a people, and from there comes the identity of what is the political unit in question here. The problem of the last 75 years, or perhaps the last 150 years when it comes to Bharat's history, has been the peculiar insistence that when you think of Bharat or India, not even Bharat for God's sakes, only India, and when I say gods, I mean the apostrophe comes after the S because it's a plural, not a singular, is that we are being told focus exclusively on the Rajya. And is Sanskriti or Rashtra or is Rajya के बीच में कोई relationship नहीं है. There is no relationship between our civilization, our nationhood and our statehood as India. We are being told पूरी तरह से आप इसको तोड़ दीजिए. And इसको तोड़ने का जो जरिया है, that is secularism. Bharat or India for that matter is being told that secularism requires India to give up its roots and its fundamental identity, and we are being asked to exist in vacuum with no sense of who we are. Which is why it is important to understand that जब आप संविधान की बात करते हैं, संविधान is not a document that exists in isolation or in vacuum. It must be understood in the Prishtbhumi of civilization and nationhood. It is that background, it is that context which informs Bharatiyata. If today we are told that India as a state does not have a civilizational identity of its own, and dare I say a religious identity of its own, we are being asked to empty this vessel called the consciousness completely. And the human mentality or the consciousness is such that it can never remain empty. You're being put through a systematic process of emptying your mind so that something else can take its place. The question is, what will take its place? What is this gold going to be replaced with garbage or filth? That is the question you need to ask yourself. Therefore, the purpose of secularism in the last 75 years, or at least since its introduction in the preamble in 1976, has been to accelerate the process of emptying your consciousness of its civilizational identity. And each time we are told that if you don't do this, then your secular credentials and your peace-loving credentials are in serious question. You are put in a moral trap. And you're being asked to choose between secularism on the one hand and Sanskriti on the other. My entire endeavor in public domain is to present arguments through the prism of संविधान to say इन दोनों के बीच में अंतर विरोध नहीं है, लेकिन अगर है और आपको इनमें से किसी एक विकल्प का चुनाव करना पड़े तो हर बार आपका चुनाव सिर्फ संस्कृति की ओर होना चाहिए, क्योंकि अगर संस्कृति है तो संविधान रहेगा और यह संविधान पूरी तरह से नहीं लेकिन इन सम वेज इस संस्कृति की पैदावार है, इफ नॉट फुल्ली. My reading is that the document is a mixed bag, and I don't use the word mixed bag in a negative sense. I'm just saying it has contributions from across the board. Because it is the very same Samvidhan, the so-called secular document, which also speaks of cow protection. How can a secular Samvidhan, which is supposed to be completely anti-Sanatani according to some people, speak of cow protection? I've given this example in the past, so I'll repeat it here. Since you have access to Google and anybody can become a lawyer without an LLB degree these days, just as people can become doctors without MBBS degrees, Google up this provision called Article 295A. Under this provision, the Union of India pays money to the Padmanabha Swami temple on an annual basis. From the Consolidated Fund of India, पैसा जाता है to the Padmanabha Swami temple in Trivandrum. अगर ये सेक्युलर राज्य है और सेक्युलर राष्ट्र है तो ये पैसा एक सेक्युलर लेट्स से पूल से हाउ डज इट गो टू अ टेंपल? आर्टिकल 27 says state funds cannot be used for the promotion of any faith, and if the preamble speaks of secularism, how is this money going from the secular fund to a religious institution or entity? Because the history is, when the Maharaja of Travancore passed a particular order, he decided that all the temples in the Travancore state do not have the resources to maintain themselves. So he said, the big temple will take care of the smaller temples, and in order to do that, जितने भी ये भूमि होते हैं इन छोटे-छोटे मंदिरों के, that will be given to the Raja, and from that whatever money comes will be given to individual temples for their upkeep and maintenance. When the princely state of Travancore merged with the Indian Union, that responsibility passed on to the Indian state. So constitutionally, there is an obligation on the so-called secular Indian state to make payment to temples. So Bharat's constitution is not an easy document to understand. It is not a straightforward document at all. जितने भी तर्क हमारे खिलाफ पेश किए जा सकते हैं, there are equally arguments in our favor. So I would request that on such a sensitive topic which requires a certain degree of expertise and competence, be careful before you say that the constitution is entirely anti-Hindu or it is pitted against Hindus, because then you walk into the trap that everything that you do is anti-constitutional or unconstitutional. Don't walk into the trap. I would also want to use this opportunity and platform to strike a distinction between two things. संवैधानिक सोच एक चीज है और संविधान एक कागज है. Strike a distinction between constitutionalism and constitution. Certainly subscribe to the notion of constitutionalism, because this country, given its diversity, needs an operating manual under which all of us work together. तो एक संविधान की आवश्यकता है, but a particular document can be criticized. You can subscribe to the notion of constitutionalism and still have problems or criticisms of the contents of a particular document. If the constitution is so perfect, like a certain book claims, and there is no need for any further amendment, why have we had 103 amendments? Bulk of these amendments have been political in nature, not remotely on the basis of constitution. It is to push a particular social agenda or a political agenda. So don't approach this document with the same spirit that you would approach a Bhagavad Gita. Respect the constitution, uske samne natmastak mat hoiye, that's all I will say. Abide by the constitution, because as dharmiks you are expected to observe and abide by the rule of law. But agar natmastak hona hai, वेदों के सामने होइए, भगवत गीता के सामने होइए, in front of the scriptures. The more you deify a man-made document which has been the subject of 103 amendments based on political expediency, the more you prove that we are textbook Macaulay Putras and Putris and everything in between. Because the one who gave us a so-called secular constitution has till date not given up his Christian identity, and by that I mean the United Kingdom. It is a Christian nation by constitution. In the House of Lords, 26 bishops have a specific seat reserved for them. This is not WhatsApp University, this is from my book. I've quoted it specifically. I'm not selling my book here. But the point I'm trying to make is, how does Europe as a civilization or a continent get to subscribe to a religious form of secularism, but when it comes to Bharat, we are expected to give up our identity altogether? ये किसके दिमाग की पैदाइश है, and what is the purpose of it? The purpose of this creature and its unique khichdi variant of Bharat, because secularism of Bharat is neither European nor fully Indian, I don't know what it is so far. It happens to be a creature of convenience and a shape-shifting creature that keeps changing its huliya on a regular basis. Every 5 years, secularism की जो परिभाषा है वो बदलती रहती है. And its entire purpose has been to drill into the minds of a young so-called liberal population that Bharat's astitva is owed only to 1947 and not before. इसका उसके संस्कृति के साथ कोई नाता नहीं है, is the entire message of this concept. So perhaps what I'm trying to say is that until and unless Bharat achieves internal clarity with respect to its identity, with respect to its parichaya, or even let me use the Mlecha word, pehchan, unless and until you have clarity with respect to this, you will never be able to you'll never be able to express yourself. And until Bharat can express itself in the truest sense of the word, a duplicate, unoriginal creature which has no sense of identity can never sit on the table of big powers. You cannot hope to share space with even China, for God's sakes, because China has made the jump from communism to a very clear identity which is based on its conception of what is the Middle Kingdom. China has greater civilizational understanding even as part of its architecture than Bharat as on date, which is why China is able to respond to the West in a language that the West understands. So you don't need examples in other continents. You have very good examples in the immediate neighborhood. I have severe problems with what China does with Bharat, but the fact of the matter is it has managed to give the West a run for its money in its own way. Bharat need not become a China, but Bharat needs to become Bharat. That's all I'm trying to say. This cannot happen as long as you operate with the rules of the game which have been set by the colonial master. You will never be able to tell your story fully using the language of the colonial master or the erstwhile colonial master. Find your own language. Find your own ways of expressing yourself. Find your own rules. This is the best possible time to make this change, because never has Bharat been better placed to embark on this journey. The saubhagya that we have is something the previous generations did not have. They never even thought they would have. The way Mahakumbh is being celebrated, previously it would have been a spectacle to showcase Bharat's poverty and filth. It would have been used to showcase Bharat's superstition. That's how it would have been showcased. Today it has become a textbook example of what Bharat can do in terms of sheer organizational skills. I am told 40 crore people, around 38.29 crore people, have managed to come to this one city. And this doesn't seem like a city where 40 crore people, a floating population of 40 crore, have come and gone. Look at how clean it has been. A simple student election in Delhi leaves the city dirty. Ask anyone who's been in Delhi during student elections, not the elections of today, even student election. And ask yourself how beautifully this entire thing has been conducted. I have no qualms whatsoever giving credit to the establishment for having done this, but I'm also saying another thing. That means, as a society, Hindus are innately capable of abiding by the rule of law and observing civic sense. We are capable of it. Since we are capable of it, it speaks volumes about the innate tendency of the society much more than the establishment. Establishment is needed for pranali. But अगर आपके अंदर वो जज्बा नहीं है, तो प्रणाली से क्या होगा? So there's a good movie by the name Chariots of Fire, and there's a wonderful line there. Man cannot put in what God has not. So if that innate tendency did not exist, no amount of rules and regulations will do that. So which is why I keep saying, it is not the constitution that keeps this country moored to the fundamental rule of existence, which is peace. It is our innate dharmic barometer which keeps us peaceful. So let's look at the next 10 or 15 years, and I'll take just 5 minutes and I'll leave it at that. This is going to be perhaps the most exciting phase for my generation, with a lot of challenges which are going to be thrown our way. Economic, military, geopolitical, environmental, whatnot. Everything is going to come under attack. So if Bharat doesn't become sashakt from an internal point of view at this stage, it will not be able to tide over what I call the period of Rahu. For you to be able to do that, you should worship Shakti. That is the only way Rahu can be quelled. Shakti worship is the only way forward. And worshipping Shakti has its own meaning at multiple levels. Second, finally, a portal has opened in the annals of time where Bharat can regain its glory, but also become contemporarily glorious, because you can't recreate the past in its entirety. To celebrate the past and to respect the past is not the same as wanting to recreate the past, because yug alag hai, kaal alag hai, samay alag hai, so you have to work accordingly. What is Bharatiyata in the contemporary period is something that we need to work on. And I've said this before, Bharatiyas will need to become strong on 3 fronts. I call it the SIP principle: spiritually, intellectually, and physically. You need Mantra Shakti, you need Ichha Shakti, and you need Kriya Shakti if we are to go forward. And as much as we must celebrate individuals for their contributions and for their revolutions in changing the way people think, don't lose hope in the innate ability of the Bharatiya society and the Sanatani society to keep producing such individuals, because we will need them at least for 3 generations for us to survive this period that is coming our way. Brahma Tej and Kshatriya Dharma you will need, Kshatriya Virya you will need as you go along, because these are the only 2 things which are capable of protecting us as we go along. So my request to people in the audience is, find meaning in tradition, because what you're fighting for is not modernity, but for survival of tradition in the modern world. Find a way to connect your past and your present, and make sure that your children become aware of it before the poison seeps into them through our education system. You will not be able to meet the mega challenges until you address all the micro challenges at home. They are connected. Set your house in order, then we can focus on setting the global house in order. Jai Shri Ram, Vande Mataram.